Welcome back. So tonight my guest is Augustus Obuadum Tanoh, aka Goosie Tanoh, who is the President's Special Advisor on 24-hour economy and accelerated export development. Did I get that right?
You got it right.
You have the longest title in government.
I'm not sure.
I've checked.
Yes.
Okay. 24-hour economy. If you write it in words,
okay.
24-hour economy is very long. A few things have changed since you last came here. I think you were here in November. 20 days to election.
Just before the election.
So three observations. It was 20 days to elections. It's now 6 months into administration. Yeah. You were Manifesto lead on jobs and employment. Now you are what I just said. And you had ideas. Now you have a little to show. What else has changed? Just talk to me through that process. 6 months into from the past and now. What else has changed?
I think the most important thing is that we have managed as a team and as a government to lift what was basically a manifesto proposition to real life and develop the strategies that will allow us to achieve growth, stabilization with the macroeconomy, job creation, expanded output, increased productivity and competitiveness of the Ghanaian economy so that we can then begin to generate wealth to satisfy our people. One of the things that the manifesto doesn't talk about extensively is the need to restructure the economy in a way that it moves away from dependence to one of self-reliance. So that definitely has changed. And if you read the program of the 24-hour economy, you'll see that there's a major attempt to address the structural transformation of this economy. The last time this was actually done was during Nkrumah's time when he sought to use the state as a tool and vehicle for industrialization and use state capital. That had its own problems and challenges. This time we've learned from that history. We've learned from all the champions commanding heights of the economy, all the way through to the 31st December revolution and its aftermath. And it's very clear to us that without working off the balance sheet of the private sector, transformation will become a very difficult proposition, particularly in our context where we are constrained resource-wise by the program of the IMF and the fact that indeed it was precisely because of the constrained resources that we had to go to the IMF anyway. And the state's ability really to continue to spend at the levels that it was without generating the necessary returns is something that we have to move away from. So in designing the program, we basically look at the private sector as the main power, the main driver, and therefore what do we have to do if we want to transform this economy in terms of pushing, providing an incentive regime and providing basically the template and the terrain that allows for domestic private sector mobilization to invest in the economy and foreign direct investment to invest in the economy.
Let's start with some first-time thoughts. When I asked you in November how confident you were this was going to win, you said you were reasonably confident. Were you surprised at the decisiveness of the victory?
Not really. The reason why I refuse to give you a percentage is that the last 2 times I've given a percentage and it's come dead on, the other party said we're cheating. So I just decided that we'll keep quiet. But I wasn't really surprised. I didn't have a sense of the landslide in September because Ghanaians normally decide October. You can then see the trend. But after a few of the global informatics and our own surveys that we do privately, it was very clear that we're heading for a landslide. And one of our team actually was dead set from June that there was going to be a landslide, but we thought he had to be careful, but he was right.
Wow. You said Mohammed had a rare opportunity to restore credibility and legitimacy to governance. You said this in November. 6 months into his government, would you say he's done that or he's doing that?
I think that the social contract, the 120-day social contract, and the fact that he has achieved all those milestones shows a new, renewed determination and purpose. And clearly that sets basically the landscape for what is to come. So in that sense, yes, I think he's demonstrated very clearly that he means business. He also means to promote and protect and expand business. And more importantly, I think one of the interesting things is that the reset is also about the state and the way the state relates to the citizenry, relates to businesses, and also relates to other institutions, even within itself. Because without an efficient state and a friendly state, investors definitely will run away, but more often than not, it will also become a barrier and a bar to progress and development. So some of the anti-corruption things he's done, the code of conduct, is to lead the way. That look, this is our dispensation, we mean business, we will do it, and we've given you a 120-day program, and we've achieved almost all of it.
On the economy, when I asked you again, you said you didn't even agree with those who said we are stabilized, because at the time they had said we had turned the corner. In November, you said we hadn't even turned any corner and we hadn't achieved stability. So we are in July. Between stability, recovery, growth, and transformation, where do you say we are? Where are we?
We are midway. Let me explain.
Yeah.
So we have the exchange rate, which is probably one of the main causes of inflation, because we import so much, right? That is basically stabilizing around 10.25. The president has announced that within a band of 10 to 12, which is a signal to the market that we will protect between that band of 10 to 12. And the important thing to look out for is that if that is the case, then of course the reduction in imported inflation will go down. 2, it is true that the converse of that is that you may not have export price competitiveness. But we did some simulations in the office, and basically we have an economist on staff, and basically looking at what they call power purchase parity, we begin to come really uncompetitive below 10.
Okay.
I think around 9.94. I mean, but there's the back of the envelope.
Yes.
So clearly, if we're in the band that has been suggested, and most importantly, if we're in the band and inflation drops, then costs of goods and services from Ghana entering the international market will also be more cheaply priced and therefore more competitive and will retain within the competitive band. I think the governor said that in the competitive index, we're at 156 or so, and we are basically dropped to 133, which is a good sign. I don't quite know the calibration of that index, but I think I read it somewhere. So in terms of export price competitiveness, low inflation, and I think we're going to see even more of a drop in inflation, because if the agricultural figures we're seeing outside of cocoa, I think it's grew by 6.7% first quarter. If it continues to where we're seeing, with the harvest, with a drop in inflation from 18 to 13, that was being reported this morning, then basically maybe Johnson Asiama's prediction and Ato's prediction that we may be heading towards an 11% year-on-year inflation rate is probably accurate. Although the fund is saying 14 and others are saying 14.9. But I think that if the Treasury continues, and because that is happening, and because cost of goods will probably keep dropping, particularly food, because, you know, from August, because of the harvest, things kind of drop. So the important thing is to generate the requisite harvest and the requisite buffer stock that allows you to intervene in the market if prices should try and provide or creep up along the normal gradient we have. You know, the gradient is like this. At harvest, we're here. By March, we are here. We want to have a steady, and then that protects household income, that protects factories in terms of the raw material input and the pricing, and therefore the cost effectiveness, cost efficiency, and the ability.
So you will say we are recovering.
We're stabilizing and recovering.
We are stabilizing. So in between the two.
Yes, in between the two.
We haven't begun to grow yet. It's too short a time. This is July.
Well, I've seen the data. I just saw the data: 6.7 for agric, 9.3 for services. Industry is about 3.4. Oil, but the oil and gas is in industry, and you know it's dropped. So I think it's created a minus 22% impact on that weighting. So that has dropped. But I think manufacturing activity is beginning to inch up slowly, which is very important. But that's real goods and services outside of the normal primary commodity volatilities that you see in gold, you see in oil and gas, and also you see in...
Some people think some of the stabilization of the currency, a lot of it's external, because of the way President Trump's tariff policies are. Most countries are disinvesting in gold and in dollars and buying gold. And gold prices are going up. And we are the largest producer in Africa of gold. So with the gold board coming in, we really have been the best beneficiaries. So they think there's gold there. Gold is a key thing there.
Let's do it step by step.
Yes.
It is true that the dollar has fallen.
Yeah.
So that has helped us.
Yes.
It is true that crude oil prices have fallen.
Good.
Even when we thought that because of the Iran-Israeli conflict, it will go to $100, as some people are speculating.
Yeah.
It's really retreated dramatically to where it was before. So that has helped us. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
But you see, you have to also look at the volumes that the gold board is buying. Volumes have gone up.
Yeah.
All right? So what hitherto would have gone out as contraband, smuggling, you must remember that Galamsey is supposed to account for 30%, which is somewhere close to $2 billion. So if the gold board has been able to recalibrate the system in such a way that it's a disincentive to smuggle and rather deal with the gold board because of the pricing that they're providing, then of course you're going to get greater volumes. So that compensates also for the kind of analysis that suggests that we are on an upward trajectory. And you can see from the reserves, we're now at 6.5 to 9 billion net, and then gross is around 10.something billion, which is a good sign. Of course, it can dissipate. Yeah. But if you have the buffers, manufacturing is growing, agriculture is growing, and also you have a stable oil price around the 60 band, all right, then it should be. So
not to be negative, but I ask this because...
Don't be negative, I beg you.
Every government has a crisis.
Yes.
So ours hasn't come yet, this one's. So have we built enough buffers that when something happens, touch wood, Iran, Israel decide they're going to fight for 3 years, oil prices go to 130, we're screwed, right? Well, so my point is that
we're not entirely screwed.
The idea is to build the country to a point where whatever happens externally, you have enough not to knock you off.
That is the purpose of the 24-hour economy program, to create food self-sufficiency, food sovereignty. We import 2.6 billion of food every year. That's a major charge on foreign exchange and could lead to a slippage of foreign exchange if indeed you have the kind of supply chain problems after COVID and the escalation in food prices, particularly grain and oilseeds. All right? So we must prepare for that by increasing our production. All right? And as you should remember, I told you that within 18 months of the start of the program, we'll begin to see results in terms of output. I think we're beginning to see results of Feed Ghana slowly seeping into the figures with this 6.7, because the crop component of the agricultural, the composition of the agricultural GDP is going up. Fisheries has gone up by 16.3%. So gradually, we're beginning to really produce and respond to the market situation as is evolving. So you're right, but the 24-hour economy is designed for food self-sufficiency, food sovereignty, supply chain efficiency, market efficiency, excess raw materials after we finish feeding ourselves and animals to industry, which we discussed, if you remember, in November.
Actually, let me take you back, because a lot of people have said that it was marketed as a job shift strategy, but it's an economic transformation strategy. So I want to go back. If you guys have this, in November, I asked him a specific question. So what is 24-hour economy? Let's see if he's deviating or is sticking to what he said. Let's hear him. But what is the 24-hour economy? And how does it address productivity?
The 24-hour economy is harnessing your total productive resources in those areas where you can expand output quickly and achieve the requisite growth and expansion that is required to fuel the growth of the rest of the economy. It's about supply chain efficiency. It's about targeting the sectors that I've mentioned and making sure that those sectors are adequately invested in to generate the requisite output. For instance, if you take, I want to give you a very classic example. Food. Soybean. Soybean is supposed to be called the miracle crop, right? What does soybean do? When you grow soybean, you get oil from it, which is the basis for your vegetable oil industry. You get what they call the cake or the expeller, which is the basis for your poultry feed industry. You get milk from it, which is the basis for substituting for those of us who are lactose intolerant, dairy, and so on and so forth. And you also get a huge market for exporting non-GMO soybean. China imports almost 100 million tons of GMO soybean from the United States. Because the reality is that if you can harness and target these areas, you generate exports, you generate domestic supply of raw materials, and you generate jobs, and generate income, and generate tax. And that's what the 24-hour economy is about, targeting to those sectors that I've mentioned.
So it seems to many people that you're the first person to actually describe it this way, because I think for sake of political communication, it was simplified to 3 shifts, 3 something, 3 something. What baffles me is, did you know then that you'll be doing this job? Because I pressed you in that interview and you said you wanted to produce cassava and cocoyam for and employ people or something, that you were not interested in a government job.
Produce cassava flour for export.
Cassava,
no, I didn't. I had no idea about that.
Okay.
You know, at all.
So, but did you say this sort of spontaneously, or was there a document then explaining all of this?
There was, the Manifesto team was very vibrant and very active. So there was a lot of debates, a lot of discussions. And out of these discussions, we began to see that beyond the slogan, you had to do transformation as a purposive input in policy and in restructuring the economy. So we looked at the various things I talked about. What is the import bill? Which are the components of the import bill that we can produce competitively in terms of food? What contributes most to inflation? Can we produce those things that contribute to inflation here? Tomatoes, for instance, in the food basket weight is 17%. So if you can produce your tomatoes here, a substantial portion, then of course, and competitively, then of course you also reduce your foreign exchange requirements to import tomatoes, but you also basically achieve a drop in prices, and therefore that translates into a drop in prices at the retail point or in the market. So we looked at that, and then we looked at what will contribute to jobs, and then what will contribute to value chain financing. Because, let me give you a classic example. Bernard, we're doing surveys around the country. We sent a team round to look at all the big and the small irrigation sites, and we went to one of the rice areas in Upper East. School feeding had imported Thai fragrance rice for school feeding, for the children. Proximate to where the schools were and where the caterers are supplying, you had farmers stacked with paddy rice.
That they couldn't sell?
No market. Do you understand?
Wow.
So if you're going to do the value chain, then basically you start with the production, you start with the offtake, you start with the processing, you start with the retail, wholesale, and you along that chain, you make sure there's offtake. So that your financing system has an inbuilt buffer that allows for the flow to continue without the requisite defaults that then create basically interruption in the supply chain and also in the financing chain.
Okay.
So this is the way in which we've approached the project. And of course, eventually, the most important thing is that we must create jobs for the 2.7 million people who are out of employment and the 300,000 young people who are entering the workforce every year. I think we discussed that those between 18 and 29 have an unemployment rate which is higher than the national average of 14.7. There's somewhere around 24%. I think it's probably easing now, but at that time, that was what it was.
So my problem is that, okay, it's not really a problem, my worry, that this is an economic transformation plan, but the people implementing it don't seem to be at the center. Because when you go to 7-year development plan, Nkrumah owned it. This was what was driving everything. I'm not saying you are in the periphery, but let me give you an example. I was at National Economic Forum. We had 7 ministers. I was moderating. You were not there on that panel. Of course, they were talking about National Economic Plan. What you are trying to do touches every ministry. Yet, the way the government is designed, at best, you are one of 3 pillars. If I look at the presidential advisors, you are one of 3 or 4, right? So you are not at the center. So ab initio, there's a problem, isn't there?
Well, I think the president made it very clear. There's a central program of government and the flagship program of government. He said that. Part of the reason why you saw us absent is that this is the nature of my team, that we don't like to talk unless we have a program.
Okay.
So we're developing what the president said from slogan to strategy, talking to so many people particularly industry and private sector, because they're the main drivers of this. And calibrating very carefully what will work, how it will be financed, what will be the main priority projects, agroecological parks along the lake, what will be the logistic hub, so that we can have a competitive, changed environment, strong output of both agri and industrial goods, including machinery and technology, by the way, and also a strong export drive and food self-sufficiency. Until we had that ready, there was no point in getting up and making all kinds of noises, until you were very clear what you wanted to do. Because don't forget that this is a transformation program. And therefore, whatever you do, you must be very clear what the outcomes are and what are the inputs that is going to make you achieve those outcomes. And what are the institutions that are going to make you achieve those outcomes. And today, we demonstrated that through all the videos that all the ministers were on board. Different programs converge, achieve synergy, achieve, consistency in policy and implementation. And in this particular case, you have to show it is a private sector that is investing in this program in a way that transforms this economy, builds up agriculture, builds up industry, and therefore builds up our national capacity to produce jobs.
So you do not see, how shall I say, the budget was read in March, the dialogue happened in March, things seem to have been started. You're saying your absence from there notwithstanding, you are still at the center of government's economic transformation.
If you listen to everybody who said, they all said, our plans for the 24-hour economy are ABCD. Everybody said that. If you read the budget on the big push, it says, this is the push to evolve and develop the infrastructure component of the 24-hour economy. It's in the budget, you can read it, all right? The fact that we were not there doesn't mean that the rest of the government basically hasn't picked it up. And the important thing also is that, the important thing really, and Ben, it's important to understand this. We have spoken so long about the private sector being the engine for development, the private sector, but if you go through the ecosystem, there's so many impediments to the private sector's growth, from unpredictable incentive regimes, energy problems, water problems. So the important thing was to get to grapple with these problems and decide how do we overcome these. And you can only do that by talking to the private sector and developing the program that we have basically presented to the people of Ghana today. And intend to implement.
We'll take a break. This is the point of view. Tonight we're talking to Goosie Tanoh, who is the President's advisor on 24-hour economy and accelerated export development. Earlier today, the strategy was launched, from slogan to strategy. We're grilling him on how this is going to really transform the economy. Stay with us.